Yeah, the drone wall on its eastern flank, there's a couple of elements to this. There's the offensive capability, which is a drone capability and relatively inexpensive, cheap drones that can be used to provide rapid surveillance and therefore for target acquisition, and those combined with weaponized FPV drones, as we're seeing to good effect in the war in Ukraine, used by both sides. But the second thing is it's this realization that you're trying to shoot down the Shahad one-way attack drones and the like using fixed-wing aircraft with multi-million-pound anti-aircraft missiles on them, or relying on multi-million-pound ground-based anti-aircraft missiles is not a cost-effective way of dealing with the threats. And the Ukrainians have been developing an anti-drone drone, and therefore they are going to see these placed around Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian areas of critical infrastructure, so that whenever the waves of Shahads come in, they're not wasting very expensive and increasingly rare anti-aircraft missiles against them. They're saving those for the ballistic missiles and for any fixed-wing aircraft and for the cruise missiles that are coming in. So it's these anti-drone drones that will launch and take out the one-way attack drones, and that's something that Europe is looking at, producing this defensive wall, because for a few $1,000s they can have the same effect that the anti-air missiles that cost a few $1,000,000 are having. So it's a cost-effective way of doing things. The most interesting thing about this is that the Ukrainian military are now coming to train NATO military in the use of drones, and this is a complete 180-degree turn, where before the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, NATO troops were in Ukraine training the Ukrainians in how to deal with the Russian threat. We're now seeing the Ukrainians are probably the most combat-proven military, with huge innovative capability, coming back and giving their real lessons to NATO, and that's a good thing. It is an effective way of dealing with the Russian incursions in the way those incursions are at the moment. The difficulty is warfare changes. We've seen innovation over the last couple of years on the front lines of Ukraine. As soon as you come up with a method of countering a threat, then your enemy comes up with a way of bypassing that counter, and it's a constant battle of innovation to try and deal with developing threats. NATO for too long has sat back, as a defensive organization and relied on its traditional military capabilities. It hasn't had that innovative streak that's in it. And I think the war in Ukraine has given NATO the wake-up call to realize that actually to be in a position to deal with modern threats and to deal with the speed that they are developing, then that level of innovation is needed. It's good that is a realization before there's actually a real and large threat facing NATO, one that is fighting with us on a daily basis. The Russians, their probing, their activity and all the rest of it has been a very, very useful wake-up call for NATO countries. It's almost certainly the Russians probing to see what a political reaction and a security reaction would be to these drone incursions, that it seems as if they are launching some form of large commercial drone from the shadow fleet shipping that is going around different coasts, and hence why we saw drones over critical infrastructure in Germany a few weeks back, and we're now seeing drones over airports in Denmark, and reports of drones over airfields in Sweden. This is part of a wider package from Vladimir Putin to probe the West. The Shahad drones flying into Poland, the MiG-31s flying over Estonia, and then we've had reports of Russian cruise missiles going into Romanian airspace, which is NATO airspace, before flying back into Ukraine to attack targets. All of this is Vladimir Putin testing two things. The first one is the political resolve. So he's trying to see what the political reaction is to try and find out how quickly and how robustly different countries and different groups will respond, and see if he can find any cracks that he can then exploit in the future. And then look at the military reaction, see whether NATO is actually in a position to defend itself, how it goes out to defend itself against these different things, and therefore look for opportunities to try and bypass any NATO defenses that there are, as well as exploit weaknesses. And I think looking at the number of incursions, and the way they've happened, that Putin has identified some clear weaknesses, both politically, and in our defences. From a political perspective, it's unprecedented that we've had two NATO Article 4s called in less than 2 weeks, and the Danes, I understand, are contemplating calling another one, with the drone incursions over Danish airfields. However, if you look at the substance behind Article 4, it is effectively just a collective stiff letter from NATO, signed by all NATO members, and a collective finger waggling. There's nothing really of more substance behind it, and the Russians will sit back and just smile and laugh at it. It's not something that is going to worry them in any way, shape, or form. But if that's the most responsive or political response that can come out, Moscow's laughing. And then from a military perspective, it's shown the fact that it's very, very difficult to identify these drones that are coming in with any certainty, and intercept them in any way, shape, or form. The Shahad drones that flew into Poland were intercepted by some Air Force capability. It's unclear how many were actually shot down and how many were brought down by electronic warfare and how many just crashed because they had run out of fuel. But there was talk of using multi-million-pound anti-air missiles launched from aircraft to down the Shahad drones, which cost a few $100,000. And economically, that is not a good way of doing things. And of course, nothing has touched the commercial drones that we're seeing over Denmark. And then the MiG 31s, they were in Estonian airspace for 12 minutes. There should have been something that triggered a response before they got into Estonian airspace. There should have been the NATO air policing patrol up there to meet them before they got into Estonian airspace. But it showed that the air policing patrol that was launched rapidly with Italian F-35s at the time managed to get in and intercept them and chase them away. But the fact that they got into airspace and were there for 12 minutes is something that Moscow will be sitting smiling at.